Hello everyone! It's been a short bit since I talked to you regarding my books. I've recently begun uploading the audiobooks for the 12 Monoliths books, and have started preparing to make more of them available, beginning with my first release book, Radical-9. While doing that, I had an idea. I make Explain series detailing the lore and important story events of stories that I like. Why don't I do that with my own stories? I've already done an Explain series on the 12 Monoliths ARG, which of course touches on the events of the books, but I can understand it can be daunting to get into a story with a reading list of all of these books. So I wanted to come in here and offer a shorter investment method to catch up on the stories of the Radical-9 Saga and the 12 Monoliths series. Now, I've uploaded a video that details my writing history along with a short synopsis of each book as they were written. It's available on my channel in the Lore and Story of playlist that this video is a part of, titled 11 Years of Being an Author. But this video is going to be something different. Today, we're going to be tackling the events of the Radical-9 Saga, the first ever set of books that I began to write, but we're going to be doing this in a chronological timeline versus a book-by-book basis. I'll be marking here which book the information is originally from, so it's clear which story we're talking about. With that said, let us begin by starting with the origin of everything. The Radical-9 series begins here. Humans have many names for the space where God resides across space and time, but for the purposes of this explanation, we will consider it the dimension between dimensions. Some call it the fulcrum of all reality, where multiple timelines are created and managed by an existence known as the Pit. The dimension between dimensions acts as a vast ocean amidst multicolored space, where universes are interacted via large bubbles that house previews of their containers. What is the Pit, you may ask? Well, inside the dimension between dimensions lies an abyss that extends as far as one could possibly imagine. Lining the walls of the Pit are various slots meant to house human souls. Each slot is individualized for the lives the souls inhabit. You see, the origin of human souls is similarly the Pit. From the Pit, the souls are scattered far out into the various universes by way of the ocean currents of the dimension between dimensions. And the universes they land into, they are born into, becoming a person. Let's say we have Person A who is born into a universe. When Person A dies, their physical body dies, and returns to the Earth as one might normally think. But their soul is then called back to the dimension between dimensions. The soul is dragged up and breaks through the universal barrier, where it is cleaned of its memories and personality. It is here that those memories are fitted into one of the slots running down the walls of the Pit. It is here where your traditional ideas of heaven or hell come from, as those memories then live out what would traditionally be considered an afterlife. This would mean that Person A, after their death, would be brought back to the Pit, and then deposited into its records. And the soul that used to be Person A would then be sent out back into the ocean's currents, to then become Person B in some other new universe. And when they died, they would return to the Pit and deposit the consciousness and memories, and then be sent out again to become Person C in another, yet new universe. This is the origin of life, and has been running up to this point autonomously. Yet, for some unexplained reason, the Pit sought further intervention, as certain futures seemed less certain as time moved forward. So, the Pit had sent forth an avatar of itself, the Father, to be born onto the world as Friedrich Adada. We've got a little side tangent before we reach Friedrich, though, as first we're going to travel to one interesting universe we'll dub Universe A, in the year 1911. Jesse Anderson lived in the northern coasts of Weymouth, Massachusetts. His suffering began when he was just 5 years old. He was on a family trip with his father, Duncan, and his sister, Isadora, Isa for short. They had been a family that had an affection for the water. Duncan had taken his 2 children out on their modest boat one summer day, and had been on the path to being an extremely fortunate formative memory for the pair. But everything started when Isa had gotten her teddy bear taken by some seagulls who'd confused it for food. Jesse had stepped in and tried to get his sister's bear back, but they felt threatened at his approach and began to attack in return. Jesse was hospitalized after the gulls began pecking and slashing at his skin with their talons. They dislocated his eyeball from its socket and gouged big chunks out of his arm. Jesse remembered feeling every ounce of the pain. None of the medication worked. He started drifting out of his own head. He began to hear less and less, and soon his parents would visit his hospital room less and less. A few weeks later, he would become more lucid, but he had to agonize over the pain of his attack. He begged God to make the pain stop, and that he would give anything. This continued for the next 6 years as he was finally allowed to go home, but he grew despondent as God never responded to his pleas. His pain had barely subsided. He could still feel the singeing pain inside his head, and no matter how he had voiced his complaints, everyone else said he was fine. He thought different, but nobody believed him. Life meant very little outside of the pain he felt, and he thought things were going to remain this way. That is, until one day, not long after his 11th birthday, a rip in time appeared before him. It was a portal unlike anything he had ever seen, and from the depths of the rip in time came a voice. "You wish for mercy. Let's see if you're willing to earn your keep. I already know your worth. It's time to show your stuff." We're gonna move ahead 3 years to 1920, and all the way across the planet in Germany. Otis Adada and Akira Namaguchi gave birth to a child they named Friedrich. This child was special in the fact that since his birth, he was blessed and cursed with foresight. He was connected to a higher plane of existence separate of all of reality. You will remember this as the dimension between dimensions I previously mentioned. Otis and Akira do not know this, of course, but the son they've just given birth to is the avatar of the pit's own machinations, dubbed the Father. The Father has existed since the beginning of time as an inner function within the pit. He is the distributor of souls into their various end places we mentioned previously. Friedrich is different than most people, as most souls when they are born to a universe are wiped clean of their previous existence. This did not happen with Friedrich, and so the knowledge of the future that the pit operates on, Friedrich had access to. It is with this knowledge that we then move forward to the months before the Second World War in 1939. Friedrich Adada, now 19, has knowledge of the oncoming war, and so chooses to evacuate the country before its bloodiest battles wash ashore the German seafront. During the time of the war's beginning, Friedrich had begun research into human genomes. He researched what made humans human, long before research on this level could become public common. During the height of his research, he had exercised his connection to the pit to open a gateway to the past, a rip in time before his own birth. This act wasn't something he wished to do often. It had to be considered most secret, of course. Normal people discovering this ability would drastically change the course of history, and those weren't the kinds of changes Friedrich was interested in making. Through the portal, he connected to the year 1917, and called out to a small boy, "You wish for mercy. Let's see if you're willing to earn your keep. I already know your worth. It's time to show your stuff." Friedrich Adada knows of the boy situation, of course, knows of his specific attitude toward higher powers, and knows exactly how he can get this child to do what he wants. "Hello, Jesse. My name is Friedrich. Do you want to go to space?" And so the boy is intrigued. "So, you can really go to space?" He laughed. "Most in your place would ask how they could get back home to their loved ones. Most don't consider how this could be good for all," Jesse said. "Oh, do explain. I already know your answer, but I'd love to hear you say it." Jesse smiled, for the first time in a long time. "My parents treat me like I'm fragile. My sister loves stories about adventure. I don't care to go to school tomorrow. It's a win, win, win." The smile remained on his face and disappeared briefly after. "All right, works for me. So, here's our plan." And so, Jesse walked through the portal. Friedrich then began to tell him that in order for his trip to space to come true, he would need to wait 20 years, so that he would be there with Friedrich in 1939. Mom and Dad can stay back and watch over the house. They just tell us not to do all the fun things. It's not going to be like that when I grow up. I asked Friedrich. He told me I was going to be much better than that. And then he smiled. I liked it when he smiled. He tells me that I'll be ready to go to space in 20 years. I groaned and moaned as anybody would when told that, but he told me everything about it, which helped the wait, I guess. I'd be getting inside this metal ship that uses explosives to propel itself up to the sky. He tells me that nobody else knows about it yet, so I shouldn't tell anybody about it. I asked him if I could tell you, and he said it was fine, because you come from a time where people already know about it. I didn't get what he meant, but I shrugged it off and assumed you know what he meant more than I do. Jesse would then prepare back in his home life, with Friedrich available through the portal that would appear whenever he needed him, and he swears himself to secrecy as to not ruin the chances of him going to space. At night, Jesse begins to dream of creatures he's never seen. They seem to be speaking languages he doesn't understand, and all seem to be cloaked in shadow. By the time 1939 comes around for Jesse, he did end up meeting with Friedrich in his research lab, just as he'd promised all those years ago. Now, 33, Jesse was no longer a small child, but a grown man who had to deal with the consequences of the choices taken in his life. I've spent my life researching things far beyond those around me, and I have to this point dedicated my entire existence toward furthering advancements into space. And now I was to give it all up. There was something Friedrich didn't initially tell me about my trip to space, something that anybody wishing to venture out to the out there, as I once called it, should most definitely know. He told me exactly how it would happen. I would breach the atmosphere in our homemade rocket, a term that horribly undervalues the amount of work I put into perfecting this space cub. I fly into the stars. As soon as I left Earth, I would be redirected onto the gravitational orbit of our moon, and would then be pulled away from the moon using my ship's hypernate thrusters to swing myself around and launch myself directly into hyperspace, technology that wouldn't be discovered for another 300 years, mind you, and thrust my ship straight into a wormhole. He told the plan to me with the straightest of all of his faces. The most normal thing he'd said all day to someone, probably. I, of course, didn't take it the way I think he wanted me to take it. Or maybe I did. He knows everything, of course. How much did I have to act to be outside of his knowledge? Does he know that I'd oppose it? Or even think of being for this plan now just to see if I could one-up him? I'm sure of it. Why all of this? I broke out of my 22-year-long reverie. Never once did I ask that question. My burning desire to see the stars up close and my faith in the man who knew everything blinded me to see what I had been working toward. I had no life, no friends. None of my family ever regarded me outside of necessity. This man, Friedrich, was a knowledgeable face that hid a sinister agenda. I understood it finally, and I realized that the faces of the creatures that I'd seen in my childhood nightmares all belonged to this one man. I'd never wanted to admit that the darkness had been so close to me, but here I stand, being told that my life as I know it is gone, and that I must go on and pilot the ship that will most certainly kill me. I can't say no, because I know that it is my destiny to pilot that ship. I have no life to return to, no person within. I'm just a boy who got his eye ripped out inside of an adult's body, with no place to go but further down. And so the only question that I can ask, one that I'm sure he's the only one he's waiting for: why? Your actions here are important, he reassures me. I know it's bullshit, and he knows I know it's bullshit. This is to prepare for another story. A boy named Devin Kempton, who will be born in the years to come. I'm but a prologue. He turns on his heels. Now come, you aren't the only one that's going to be making this trip. Consider yourself half of a prologue. Friedrich then introduces Jesse to the other half of a prologue, Rose Linden. Jesse knew that his life was nearing its end, considering neither Friedrich nor Rose saw it fit to introduce Rose past her name. They loaded into the ship, and Jesse begins to feel uncomfortable. He begins seeing visions, but they aren't of a life he recognizes. I didn't have a moment in my life flashing before my eyes because I had no life to flash. Instead, I saw his life. The boy whose life was predicated on the waste that was my own. It makes a twisted sort of sense, but his was the last that I wanted to see. I started to get angry. Angry at myself, angry at Friedrich, even angry at Rose beside me, who I couldn't notice more than her protruding stomach. Even angry at the budding human inside her body. And then we gravitated toward the moon. I found that the one person I could stay mad at was the one that the anger flowed the easiest to. I was angry with him. That anger flowed through everything that was left of me as we swung around, and it never ceased. I don't know how long we were inside of that ship. It felt like years. I don't know how I would have lived that long if possible, but nothing else seemed to matter. I saw the wormhole before my eyes, and it was the most horrible-looking beauty that I'd ever seen, but it still could not defer the slightest bit of rage from my boiling blood. As the ship passed through, I screamed for the first time in over 20 years. It was the most blood-curdling scream that tore itself at the seams. My body was completely and wholly disintegrated. Our ship split in two. Rose accomplished a great feat for a man, but one not a surprise to Friedrich. She landed on an uncharted planet in a far-off galaxy, where she would soon give birth to a healthy baby boy. His name doesn't matter, and Rose wouldn't matter in the long run, because the both of them would be renamed by history as Adam and Eve, by some cruel reference to the origin of a completely new species on a planet that hid its sun like a prized commodity. Of course, this planet would be known as Tetros in the Black Eye Galaxy, and Eve would raise her Adam to grow up to be healthy using the various sources of food and shelter across the empty planet. What happened to me was much less of an easy story. We'll return to Jesse and the result of Rose's trip out into space much later, but first we must return back to Friedrich on Earth, but we're going to speed along to 1950. Friedrich has returned to Germany after the end of the war. I do want to make an important note here that the way time plays out in this universe is different than ours, as World War II actually ends with the United Kingdom coming out as the clear victor as the world superpower. This will come up later, but is important as background information for now. Friedrich sits on an abandoned bus, for he has an appointment with someone from the future who is connecting to this point in time now, similar to how he connected back to Jesse almost 11 years prior. Friedrich shows his guest around the ruins of Weimar, the beggars of those that struggled to survive after the war's devastation and ensuing reparations. He talks about his successes in reaching space before anybody else, the secret he keeps from all else. It was a one-man journey, and I saw the takeoff myself. To think, a man in the world beyond. It was done with complete and utter silence, and I'm one of 3 people alive who know of this event. Our correspondent, who shall remain anonymous, found interesting things up there. That is where my research truly began. Friedrich then returns to the flat he's transformed into his new laboratory. Something unassuming from the outside, but inside hosts his new project, the Human Genome Project, otherwise called the Schroeder Experiment. Friedrich had since been renowned for his work on human biology, and as such amassed a collection of 10 notable scientists across the globe for his biggest project. Friedrich walks into the laboratory to find 10 prison cells where the test subjects were locked up when not being actively tested on. I walk across the room, my footstep echoing off the walls. I turn and open the hard metal door. Inside is a small room that is not unlike a prison cell in looks. A metal bench is chained to the wall, hanging. A lone stool sits in the corner of the room, and on it is the hunched body of Ken Schroeder. He's wearing nothing but his undergarments and smells absolutely rancid. If I'd taken a quick look at him, I'd have assumed him deceased. But he stirs. He sits up and inhales deeply. What? He screams, his eyes darting around the room. Why, hello, Ken. Here! I smile and walk over to him. The reason Ken and all the other scientists are in here is one reason, simply. I've run out of chromosomes to test on, and it isn't like there's a supply for people to readily take in or test on. So I gathered some of the smartest minds across Europe and Asia, and I began to study their genes. I've kept them down here, against their will, I will admit. Of course, they wouldn't have agreed for the test if I'd asked, Ken specifically. I would perform tests on him while he slept. I'd keep him down using sedatives, and then I took live samples through very, very invasive surgery. He's mainly okay. His mind is a little messed up, though. Ken twitches slightly, and looks over to me and then down to his little brown notebook beside his bed. I know what that little book will do to me in the times coming. Ken's son Casey will use it to prove my guilt in a court of law, and bring me to my demise. I'm not going to stop it, though. Those who can see the future are gifted, and those who wish to change it are fools. My time for this world was never infinite. My job still needs doing, and that job is keeping this world going until it can no longer go. Interrupting the young scientist's crazy scrawlings would surely go against the plan. Friedrich then confirms the death of another of his test subjects, Natasha, a Russian scientist who died choking on her own bodily fluids. She wasn't showing positive signs of mutation, so she was merely a result of the process. He confirms that each of them are destined to die in these cells, except for one survivor, a German scientist named Sonja von Kleist. She was only 10 when the Second War had begun, and her family had the luck of leaving the country before things got bad, just like he had. Although her fortune soon led to her misfortune, as being part of this experiment was her fate. Now she was 21, and her brain had adjusted to the tests and new living adjustments. It doesn't matter to me. I know she lives past me, so her well-being now only gives credence to her survival. I need her for later, and she'll keep this ball rolling. Sonja cranes her head and gives an expectant look towards me. You took a little longer than expected, she said, letting her head fall back onto the wall behind her. You don't seem the least bit surprised to see me, I reply. Of course not. You said you'd be back, and here you are. You are many things, Friedrich Adada, but a liar you are not. She is correct. I may have done my fair share of questionable actions in the past, and present, and future. One thing I can claim, too, is I've never lied. I know how everything goes. Why lie about it? I also happen to know when I'm being lied to, of course, knowing all of this. Are you here to do more tests on me, Doctor? Going to rip my heart out again? Once was enough, and I'm sure you know why I'm here. Or can at least guess, I ask. The others are gone, aren't they? Ken was the last to go, just before I came in here. He lasted longer than I thought. You may be wondering how Sonja is so calm throughout all of this, how she was able to survive for so long with no brain damage at all. The answer is simple. I made it so she could. Her testing was different from the rest. She's barely even human anymore. Her thoughts are hers, but they're mine too. Her will is hers, but it is mine too. She is an organic synthetic, but also a synthetic organic. She is a lovely little paradox which continues to live and not be alive all at the same time. All of this because of my study. My chromosome research led to the development of custom synthetic human organs and systems. That's what the other 9 subjects were for. They provided me with the extra cells to test on and use for my most perfect creation, my own creature. New blood, new insides, none of the unnecessary human weaknesses like the heart or the lungs or anything else that can fail. All that remains is the ever-growing chromosomes powering the suit of electronic connections. She is like a monitor, and the server is being run directly by me. Of course, her skin shall age like any other, and she'll have the look of an elder, but her insides shall be as good as they ever were. Why don't we get out of here? I'm sure we have so much to talk about, I say. Why, of course. I'd do anything for you, Friedrich, Sonia says, a wink on her face. Now, like with Jesse, we're going to be checking back with these two later on, as we have another factor of the story to move over to. We're going to meet a small boy named Larry George in the year 1971. In 1971, a small boy named Larry George celebrated his 5th birthday with his twin brother Stephen. Larry lived in Greenbush, New York, with their parents Teresa and Gilbert George, and the twins' older sister Heather George. The George household was not well off, but they were able to get presents for both of their growing boys. Presents that, as presents to small children do, begin to warp their interests and personalities around. Young Stephen received his father's baseball glove, and Larry received a small black box. It had been a tape recorder. When the birthday celebrations were over, Larry turned the tape recorder on, put on the headphones that came with it, and listened to the tape. But what played back for Larry wasn't music, but instead was a voice calling out to him. Hello? Hello? Larry asked out loud. Stephen turned to face Larry, a confused look on his face. What? No, I didn't mean you, Larry said. I was talking to, Talking to who? Got an imaginary friend? I think, Larry said, equally confused. Huh, that's cool, Stephen said, and was instantly bored of the topic. There's no need to speak so loud. I can hear you just fine from in here, said the voice. It had an airy quality, like it was uttered by a spirit of the wind. I am here for a very important purpose. I am here to be your guide. Guide? Larry thought, looking back out to Stephen to judge if the sound was spilling out from his headphones. It still sounded so surreal that they were talking to someone trapped in the tape. Stephen, lost in his own world, surely wasn't making any sounds. He would pull a prank like this, but he isn't doing it. He pulled the blanket over his knees and crawled into the darkness. Who are you? I am not sure. I just know that I am supposed to be a guide. Will you help me? Can I help you? Help me? I don't think I need help. Larry thought back to the voice, and then he thought on it more. Was there anything he needed help with? He closed his eyes and then thought up to the starry sky, and he knew sometimes his mom and dad were sad. They never told the boys what they were sad about, but sometimes he saw the looks when they tried to hide them. He wasn't sure what they were so sad over. Are you a friend? I want to be. I want to help. Okay, I'll be your friend. I guess I could use some help. What do I have to do? Larry thought it was odd at first, but came to understand that this must be the reason his father gave him this present. Maybe this was his father's way of telling him that he and his mom were sad? Like in offering to help them out, but if that were the case, why couldn't they just speak to the guide and help themselves? It wasn't that he wouldn't do it, he was just confused on a great many things. Fortunately, since Larry was only 5 years old, these concerns lasted the entirety of 12 seconds. When he was downstairs, he was initially jealous of Stephen's present. He thought it looked a lot more practical. You could do a lot of things with a ball and glove. Lots of activities outside would be played with a ball and a glove. By comparison, the cassette player had seemed dull. But now, just like the concerns that bore over him, those feelings washed away as if they had never existed. He can play with the ball all he wants, but he didn't get a friend for his birthday. I need just one thing. I need to make a bond. I don't want to lose you. Why would you lose me? I'm scared. I had a friend once before, and I lost them. It makes me so sad. Well, I don't want to lose you either. What do I need to do? I want to know your name. Once I know your name, I'll tell you mine, and that will be it. Then we'll be all set. That was it? Larry was almost scared over the word bond. In truth, he hadn't known what it meant. It almost sounded scary, but if they were just exchanging names, then he'd definitely want to bond with other kids as well. Oh, well, my name's Larry. Larry, do you accept me as your friend? Your guide to life? Sure. What's your name? You can call me Cappy. Cappy? Alright, it's a bit of a strange name. I like it, though. Reminds me of a baseball cap. There's one more thing, Larry, that I need to ask of you. Larry struck up another confused look. He looked around his mini blanket fort, waiting for the rumbling sounds of the cars outside to cease. They were always so loud. I wish Mom could go turn them off. What is that? I need you to listen to my advice. If I'm going to be your guide, it comes with giving advice. Sound fair? Yeah, sounds fair to me. Good. The first piece of advice is to get some sleep. Nothing good comes from staying up all night. Aw, but it's not even all that late, and the cars outside are still so loud. Larry, the cars outside will not bother you once you fall asleep. I promise you that. It will be very... Cappy seemed to hesitate on the word choice. You need to be able to listen when I give you advice. I am only looking out for what is best for you. The voice that introduced itself as Cappy, in fact, has some history on this planet before 1971. I try to keep some sense of order as the early 1900s have a lot of moving parts, and I wanted to keep some room for the Jesse Anderson-Friedrich Adada plotlines to let them breathe. I will now begin to cover Cappy's history up to this point in the story. It was late in the summer of 1903 when a meteor crashed into a southern Kentucky grasslands near a farm owned by an old man named Theodore Bagg. Inside the crater, a protoplasmic specimen crawled on gooey appendages before shifting its appearance to that of a human infant before being discovered by a man. Confused of the child's origin, his hospitable side took him to take the child in, caring for it as if it were his own. The infant aged slower than a normal human. After 25 years of caring for the child, the farmer passed away, and the creature looked like that of a 15-year-old. It had no gender, and no name which it was called. The farmer had only referred to it as you. Once the farmer passed, you stayed in the farmhouse, as it was the only home it had known on Earth. It was able to stay here until one of the farmer's exporters, confused at the mysterious cease of shipment, arrived to investigate. The exporter discovered the farmer's corpse, and the creature he believed responsible for the act. The farmer never made public knowledge of the existence of the child, so the exporter believed that the creature had murdered the old man to take his home. He confronted you, accusing it of murder and theft of the man's home, which caused the creature to become upset. The exporter called the police and drove the creature out of the old man's home. For the next 11 years, you would live off the streets and on the run, only visibly aging about 4 years in that time. During its experiences with the Great Depression, you learned how to deal with sorrow and how to survive on the smallest amounts of food. As Germany invaded Poland in 1939, you took notice of savagery of the German Blitzkrieg. It sympathized with those they terrorized. It listened to a lot of blues around that time, concocting a new identity based on one of its favorite singers, Alonzo Johnson. It shifted its physical appearance to be more masculine and enlisted in the army, remembering the stories that the farmer had told about his time in the war. It was put on reserve under the alias of Alonzo Johnson. It succeeded in its training to join the United States Third Army. It was sent to clean up Germany in the invasion that took place in 1945. It acted differently in combat as it was trained, as it didn't care about protecting its fellow soldiers. It instead focused on defending those who couldn't defend themselves, such as with the Polish and German Jews who were stolen away into the concentration camps. You saw the war through to its end. It witnessed the trials of the German soldiers in the aftermath of all of the fighting. Yu's sense of justice over humanity waned as it came to terms with the atrocity of the war crimes that these humans could inflict on one another. As Yu dedicated itself to rebuilding the lives of those destroyed by the war, it saw that the victims it tried to help also carried darkness within. cries of revenge and bloodlust were common whispers that traveled through the night. During this time, you began to fully understand human nature. It only served to wrong and hurt one another, rather than to live and coexist. It was also during this time that the creature discovered its ability to project its voice through certain human electronics, but only devices that the creatures personally touched could be made into a channel for it to communicate through. It spent its time through the second half of the 1940s and all of the 1950s creating 95 different channels through which it could communicate through. You decided that if humanity was willing to fight itself to extinction, it would stop fighting it, and instead, it would be its guide to the bitter end. It had sent the channels it created to guide certain individuals to turn the tide of the planet. Unfortunately, the first listeners of used devices did not last longer than 3 months without ending their lives. Disturbed, you had been shocked to learn that the human mind was quite more fragile than it initially believed. Most people that listened to you ended up dead sooner rather than later. And then one of its channels came into possession of a small boy in Greenbush, New York. Larry falls asleep to his new friend's advice and dreams of farm animals and all sorts. A fact that disturbs Cappy, but one that seems to signal that this could be the connection he hoped for. He started off small by advising Larry to thank his parents for the gift he had received, and letting Larry know that since he'd forged a bond with him, only he could hear his voice. A few weeks then passed by as the two boys began for kindergarten, and Heather got ready for her first day of the 3rd grade. In his new environment, Stephen adjusts relatively easily, being the more social of the two boys, whereas Larry faces more difficulty, turning to Cappy for help. Larry's teacher begins asking him to put away his present, and to this Cappy bids him to stand up to authority, and that just because they're authority does not mean they're right. Later, at home after Larry's parents were called, and he was inevitably scolded for his insubordination, Larry convenes with his new friend. What you did today was learn firsthand that authority isn't the end. They aren't always in control of you. Sometimes you need to stand your ground to them. But it was just wearing a pair of headphones. Today, yes, but there may be some day where this piece of advice comes singing back to you, and you really need it. You never know when the formative years of your childhood will come back to you later in life exactly when you need it. There will be times this may get you in trouble. Today could have ended up differently with you being sent home. That is the risk of the world. I am instilling the building blocks in hopes that it shall be useful. I see. Larry looked up to the ceiling in the dark. He really didn't see, but if Cappy had said so, he must have had his reasons. He sighed and rested his head on his arm. I just wish I could be better at talking to people. I know, Larry. I know. This is something that shall get easier with time. I promise. We're going to pause with Larry's story for now, as we need to wait a few years before we catch back up with him. We are going to be moving ahead 3 years for some new phases, and then some old. Next up, we're going to travel across the country to San Diego in the year 1974 to visit 2 children who are laughing gleefully. Their faces are blurred as the fogginess of memory hides their identities. They look to be about 12 years old. The boy is swinging on a children's swing set with the girl pushing him from behind. Their faces start to fill in as their voices begin to fill the space. Higher, Devin, higher! The girl's voice calls out. We gotta go as high as possible to reach space. Mission Command needs to go higher! I'm trying! The voice belonging to Devin replies back. The girl sees him kick his back legs out from under him and flies out of the swing. He reaches his hands out as if reaching for the clouds. Unfortunately, he ends up falling back toward the earth, and you hear something precious break. It was his leg. Oh, come on, Devin! Astronauts can't travel to space with a broken leg! Come on, now what do we do if we get hurt? He stops crying for a moment to look up at the girl. He was trying really hard to keep up from bursting again. We get back, he says, sitting up, but it was too much. Ah, Alex, it hurts! He burst back into his loud wail. Come on, Devin, my mom's going to hear you, and we won't be able to go to space anymore. Alex says, her voice is strained. A few weeks pass, and the two children have played hooky to visit the library. It was clear the two children couldn't be older than 12. They have each gathered books of all sorts of various topics relating to space, and the travel to such. It is clear they have a massive interest in the subject. All the other ones on the shelves were too confusing for me, Devin's voice called out, bringing Alex back to focus on the memory. What book did you get? The Martian Chronicles? Dev, that's science fiction. That won't help us get to space. I told you there wasn't anything else I could understand, he says, prompting a hushing sound from the librarian, reading a magazine at the other end of the room. An older man peeks out from his book and stares at Alex and Devin, then returns to his reading. What do you have there? Devin asks. It's a book on space and time, at least what I think. How are you going to understand that? I don't know, just thought something this big would help. It looks like a smart book, and that's how people get to space, right? They're smart. You have to be able to understand it first, dummy. This is a stupid idea. We shouldn't have skipped school for this. Come on, Alex, you can't give up that easily. Your parents haven't been the same since they lost your sister. Don't you want to find her? Find out who she is? Of course I do. Well then, come on, put that stupid book away and let's go find a better one. Excuse me. They see the man in the corner look up from the book once more. I seem to have overheard your conversation, and it piqued my interest. You two are interested in heading to space? Devin's eyes lit up at the recognition. Oh boy, yes! Come on, Devin, we don't know this guy, Alex says. It's to look for your sister, right? Forgive me my intrusion, but how did she manage to make it all the way up there? I'm a science professor, so I happen to know a little bit about space, and I'm just curious. See, Alex, this could actually be way better than looking at those dinky books. Maybe you could ask this guy about it. I don't like this. Come on, let's just ask him some stuff. Something wrong with that, right? Maybe he can even help us if we tell him about it, okay? Guess so. So you see, Devin begins, Alex here is gonna have a sister. That is until one day they lost her. I don't think we were supposed to know then, but we mistook it for something else entirely. This was a few years ago. Is there something special with that period of time? He asks. If it had been that long, why wouldn't they have found her by now? A flash of recognition passes in the man's eyes. Oh, I'm sorry. I seem to have mistaken. I mean, Alex's parents haven't so much as talked about it since it happened. I mean, I know it's bad to lose a kid, but they've gone completely silent about it. So, we've been thinking, where could a kid go if they got lost? Where would be the perfect hiding spot if he never wanted to be found? Space! Devin cut in. The man was silent. So, you see, we've been trying to find out anything and everything we can to get to space. Maybe if we can find a way to get there, we can find out where Alex's sister is. I see. And so that is why you were searching through those books on space, the man says. Yeah, he quietly replies. Can you help us? You're a professor of science, right? What do you know about space? And so the man introduced himself as Noah Marshall, and suggested they stop by his Sunday school classes. They'd be much interested to learn about the world and such topics like space. This enthralled Devin, and at his excitement, Alex would soon join along. Also in 1974, Gregory Daniels is born to two parents in upstate New York. 1 year later, in an undisclosed location, Friedrich Adada and Sonia von Kleist gave birth to a baby boy, and Friedrich names him Jack. As a child of the father and the world's first automaton, he would have complications in life due to the level of dark matter inside his system. And then in 1975, Mason Radica is also born in upstate New York. These two, among others that have yet to be born, will be very important for the Radical-9 Saga, so I want to make note of them here. Now we're going to head back to San Diego for a few years later. Alex and Devin surely have learned the mistake of their logic concerning traveling to space with time, but visiting Mr. Marshall's classes did remain something the pair would do together. Albeit for a time their schedules didn't align, so they had taken opposite classes with Mr. Marshall. And now we're here in 1978. I don't know what to do, Dev. For so long, I thought she was invincible, Alex says. Her voice is shaking. Hey, it's okay, dude. Cancer sucks, but she'll get through it. She's your mom. I know how much she's been through and how much as you have. The pneumonia, the miscarriage, the suicide attempt, and even whatever happened before I knew you. Listen, she's gonna get through this, he says, pulling her closer. I can't lose her. When my dad died last year, she absolutely lost everything that made her shine. Dev, I can't lose her too. Alex started to break, with tears running down the side of her face. Hey, come on, okay. You know what? Let's go see Mr. Marshall then. We can see if he has anything to help, Devin says. Okay, I think I could use it. I haven't seen him all this week. You said you were going to go on Wednesday. I know, but I've been so busy with my mom and school and everything. Well, we're going to go, and we'll see if I can't switch back into your session. That way, if we go together, you might have more motivation for it. Mr. Marshall runs his classes out of his large manor, and his house has teachings for those of all ages. The two join in on a session unfamiliar to both of them, and they are welcomed with open arms. They begin by reciting prayer, led by Noah Marshall himself. In each and every one of us that spirit dwells, yet it is not our spirit. It is a fragment of a spirit that came from heaven's gate. And since we are not whole, our whole lives go out to searching for the rest of those fragments. My children, do not end up like the millions of others who waste their lives to never find their fragments here on Earth. I shall not waste my time, the chorus answers. To find our fragments, we must wait for our time to ascend beyond human. It is in the beyond that we find our true selves. Now today we also speak on the topic of our vessels. They are nothing but, and as such we treat them with respect, as they are only ours for a short time. Of course, this isn't speaking for accidents, but this message is one of the most important for you to keep close. Under no circumstances should you intentionally harm your own body. If you are expected to ride out our journey to the very end, then we must keep our vessels in top condition. This includes suicide, of course, but that is a direct refusal of the next level. Now, from this point, a woman enters the scene and begins the next part of the session, a systemic sacrifice of a personal belonging. Now, if you're getting cult vibes, good. You're supposed to be getting cult vibes. Noah Marshall is running a social community that mirrors the Heaven's Gate cult from our world, and he's preparing his acolytes' vessels so they may transcend their reality to ascend to the next level. Now, we're going to put a pin in the story of Alex, Devin, and Noah Marshall as we return to Larry's story as it picks up 2 years later in 1980, and also a few more faces for the modern day of the Radical-9 Saga. Stephen and Larry woke up around the same time that Heather's acceptance letter to Yale arrived to the George household. Their parents were ecstatic, but they were also troubled by the thoughts of their first child going away to college so soon. Both Gilbert and Teresa were sucked into workforce just after high school to make ends meet. They had no personal experience of what higher education could offer their daughter, and they would be lying if they said they weren't immensely grateful for the scholarship she'd earned. Larry's guide was still with him after all of this time, nudging his direction and being his one person to talk to when it all came down. He was thankful for Cappy, not knowing what he would have done without him. Larry's grown up since he was a small boy. He didn't carry around his headphones everywhere anymore. He has his own sort of courage within him, even if it wasn't quite at his brother and sister's levels yet. He did choose to speak with his friend at least once every night. Things weren't all good, however. His grades slipped the first half of the year, C's and D's replacing the B's of old, and his father most of all didn't know how to process that fact. Both Heather and Stephen were getting fantastic grades, sure. Stephen would slip once in a while and get a C on a test, but he usually brought it back up by the end of the quarter. Gilbert didn't know how to deal with the sudden slip of one of his kids, when up to this point, things were doing just fine. There was a mistake somewhere along the way, and he couldn't bear to think that he had anything to do with it. His other two children were doing so great, so it had to be with Larry specifically. Things came to a boiling point during Christmas break when Larry's poor grades had angered Larry's father to the point where he'd stomped into his room and broken one of Larry's records. Don't let your grades get you down. There's always a chance to raise them, his sister Heather said. I just don't think it's fair. You and Stevie are treated so much differently than me, just because of some stupid tests. Larry crossed his arms looking at her. His heart is in the right place, Larry. He knows that your grades are important. They decide your future, she said, looking down. I don't see how numbers on a piece of paper can tell me how smart I am or how successful I'm gonna be. I didn't either, Larry, but look where I am. I just did my work and now I'm going to college in a few months. She tried for a reassuring smile, but he quickly changed course. I know you can pick up to at least a B. You're a smart kid. I'll replace the record and add one more onto that fact tomorrow when we get out of school. But you've got to apply yourself. Sound fair? Larry groaned, but he complied. He already knew that numbers don't define him, and Cappy told him as much as that 2 years ago. And I want to mention that during this time, another important figure is born in 1980 in the Denver, Colorado area, being Jay Ryan. Now back to Larry. His grades continue to slip as the school year continues. He's been seeing his school counselor more, and who often recommends a doctor for Larry to speak to. Gilbert got frustrated with this. My son has told me for this for years that some friend lives in this damn cassette player. I should have never gotten it for him. He threw his arms in the air, looked aside, and shook his head. What do we do to fix him? We must stop this before it gets too deep. His mind was wrapped around the idea of music. This unhealthy association. Now, it was impossible to remove music from his life, obviously, but he cannot have any memorabilia. Any of that reinforces that grip it has on his life. Dr. Abbott mentioned. His bushy eyebrows bent down and his beady eyes stared at both Gilbert and Teresa. Oh, we can't take it away from him, Teresa said, her eyes wandering around Dr. Abbott's office. Larry sat back in the office with a hastily marked 1 on the door. He never liked this place. He called the doctor a quack and a half. He was 100% that Dr. Abbott wasn't a licensed doctor in any way, shape, or form, but he knew that he was the only person his parents would be able to afford. He sat in the room, sat away in an effort to keep his discussion with his parents private, although the good doctor was quite a loud speaker naturally, so the flow of conversation from his end was at least audible. He didn't know what to feel inside. You baby him, Gilbert said, making a sort of sound at the end that sounded like a spat. It was suffice to say that Gilbert was up to his shoulders in stress over the whole situation, and desired to see the end of it immediately. I care about him, Gil. If you do, then you must let him grow without it. You will keep lashing out because all of this crazy, rebellious music these kids listen to. It isn't good for them. Dr. Abbott spat himself, craning his neck, cracking it loudly. They have no respect in that gobbledygook and helping him one bit. There are kids like Lawrence that take it to the next level. If this continues, I'm afraid to say he might go out and kill someone. Teresa gasped. Gilbert shook his head and crossed his arms, letting out a deep breath. Got it, Doc. We'll take care of it right, dear. He looked off to her. Yes. Same time next week? Gilbert asked Dr. Abbott. A crooked smile crossed his face, teeth missing and darkness filled the gaps. Sure thing, Mr. George. I do wish to hear how the treatment handles good Lawrence. Larry didn't adjust to the treatment well. It was an obvious fact to anybody involved that would have been an inevitability. As soon as they got home, Gilbert hobbled up toward Larry and Stephen's room. Larry, knowing what was going on from his eavesdropping, ran up the stairs after his father. Dad, you can't do this! It's my stuff! To Gilbert George, all of Larry's things were his things. He provided the roof he lived under, and so until he was 18, and out of that damn door, he was going to have to deal with it. Gilbert then destroys all of Larry's records, and then moves to confiscate Larry's cassette player. This here is an immensely chaotic moment that completely severs Larry's trust in the parental unit, and something he's fully not wanting to go through with. This causes unrest in the George home for the rest of the day, as everyone is on edge from the altercation. Stephen even temporarily rooms with Heather to avoid the tension emanating from his brother. However, not all is off, as a few minutes later, a despondent Larry finds the cassette player back in his pants pocket, and discovers that Cappy had somehow found his way back to Larry. What is going on? He asked aloud before he could think any more. He unwrapped the headphones and plugged them into the cassette player. Cappy, are you there? Hello, Larry. Oh, Cappy, thank God. I thought my dad broke you. I saw him throw you out. He did because of that doctor who told him to. I have a bond with you, Larry. So if that means I'll always find my way back to you. I'm supposed to be your guide. How do you do that? I mean, the cassette player should be broken, though. How it happens is another story for a future day. I'd love to tell you that one in person. In person? You're actually someone out there in the world? Larry asked. Yes, everybody is someone out there in the world. Guess I'd never really thought about it. I sort of thought you'd be like a ghost or something. I am no ghost, Larry, but we both know that at the current moment the only thing dead here are those records of yours. Larry sat back in his bed and groaned, letting out his entire chest worth of breath. God, it sucks so bad. You can't let him crush your dreams, Larry. You love music. I know, Cappy, but he's my dad. Without him, I wouldn't have met you. Yes, I understand that you love him, but you must also love yourself. Here's what I think. You should go out and get a guitar. A guitar? I don't have that kind of money. Besides, my dad would probably just smash like all my records. I can help you with that, Larry. Don't you worry. How are you gonna do that? Larry asked, but Cappy didn't reply. He was left to himself for the rest of the night, and so he took in a deep breath and rested his head against the pillow. So many things in his life were out of his control, but Cappy seemed to be the one thing that was very much the opposite. Someone who knew what to say to get him feeling more at ease. He dreamt of many things that night. His father, his records, but the prevailing image that came to him was a starry night sky. He dreamt of sailing across the stars and wondered what kind of music they liked down there. He wondered if he would someday get to go to space to know. Speaking of traveling to space, we're going to be shifting back over to 1982 to meet back with Alex. She has a private meeting with Noah Marshall. She's 19 at this point, and based on her responses to Mr. Marshall, it is clear that years of sorrow have harrowed her experience. She's proverbially drank the Kool-Aid at this point. When a student turns 19, their earthly body is seen as complete, as a vehicle to the next level. That is the minimum age requirement you to handle the full ascension process, but it's not the only requirement. Of course, all of what I've told you and shown you up to this point has been in help for you to see the beyond, to see what we can become. All of that is useless if your body can't make the trip. I've shared this information with Dante a few years back, since his body was getting old, almost too old for Ascension, but he was lucky. He made it in time, and now he'll be joining us for Ascension, whenever the call is made. Sherry became ready on her 19th birthday almost 3 years ago now, and now it's your turn. I must plant my seed within you, with my body as the chosen progenitor of the next level, shall all our spirits ascend. Larry is now a high school junior, and his grades have since picked up considerably. Mysteriously, the George family household received a package, supposedly signed by Dr. Abbott, containing an acoustic guitar inside with specific instructions for Larry to take up making music to satisfy his fixations. A note beguiled by Gilbert George, but after speaking with Teresa, he relented. Coincidentally, after this note and present arrived, Dr. Abbott went missing, and had never been seen from again. Larry's rising grades and the disappearance of his therapist both gone hand in hand for him to no longer seeing one. A fact that had eased Gilbert George and lightened the tension on the George household. During junior prom, Stephen easily found a date, and Larry had stayed more in the background, Cappy telling him not to worry if he doesn't find a date, that things will inevitably work out. At the prom, Larry meets with another socially outcasted student named Stanley Tix, or Sticks for short. He bonded quickly with Sticks, and I was eventually invited to come hang with some of his friends, and eventually join the garage band. Larry found himself at Sticks' trailer after the school the next day, and was introduced to the rest of the band, Rosewood. Paul Polly Knox ran the drums, Thomas Tommy Boy Bentham on lead guitar, Marianne Wilhelm on lead vocals, with Sticks himself on bass. Larry begins to form a crush on Marianne, but notices that she seems to be involved with Polly, bringing forth a dilemma as they take Larry on as the rhythm guitarist. This year is when things started to shift for both George brothers, as Larry's grades would continue to stay consistent from this point on, and he would find his own niche with the school band. But Stephen, on the other hand, would begin to slip from honor roll, and his parents would discover a stash of LSD he received from his prom date, Lainey De La Rue. This would lead to an increase in calls home for the rest of their junior year. In September of 1982, David Cress would be born in Aurora, Colorado. We next see the George brothers on their graduation day in 1983. The whole George family was in attendance of their overly sunny Saturday afternoon. Larry's grades had never been better than his last quarter of his senior year, and his parents didn't know it, but inside his pocket underneath the robes sat the cassette player with Cappy by his side. Also by his side was Marianne, also dressed for the occasion. It would definitely led to a disgruntled Polly who had not just split from Marianne, but also from Rosewood a few months back due to creative differences. They've also since replaced Polly on drums with one of Styx's neighbors, Kevin Whaley. In the time since Cappy advised Larry to follow his heart and ask Marianne out. The two clicked instantly. They had already been fast friends, so it only made sense that once her relationship with Polly ended, Larry would fill the role he left. Stephen had managed to graduate, but his grades were lackluster, only coasting on the fact he earned a baseball scholarship at NYU the following year. Both George boys were called up and received their degrees that both of them packed away from their high school memories, eager to move on for the next steps of their lives. After Larry and Stephen's high school graduation, the George household is left feeling empty as the children embark on their separate paths. Heather is thriving at Yale, living on campus and balancing her studies with an externship at a prestigious law firm in New Haven. Meanwhile, Stephen is also living on campus at NYU, but his college experience is darker. He frequently parties, and unbeknownst to his parents, his drug problem is escalating. Larry, the youngest sibling, has taken a different route. Instead of heading to college, he decides to hit the road with his band. Influenced by Cappy, Larry chooses freedom over traditional education, a decision that drives a wedge between him and his father, Gilbert, who had hoped for a more conventional future for his son. Larry's ecstatic about the opportunity to travel and perform with the band Rosewood, which includes Styx, Tommy Boy, Marianne, and Kevin. They tour in an RV, performing gigs that slowly increase in size and reach, helping the band gain a foothold in the music scene, especially in the capital region. As Rosewood begins to find success, they face the challenge of maintaining their unique sound. After a particularly successful show in the city, Styx proposes they evolve their style to incorporate elements from the more popular rock bands, arguing it could help them secure more gigs. Larry firmly opposes the idea, believing in their distinct sound, rooted in melody and funk. It's what makes them special. Tommy Boy recognizes Larry's perspective, but is also worried about their dwindling opportunities for performances. Kevin takes a neutral stance, avoiding involvement in the growing conflict. To Larry's dismay, Marianne sides with Styx, expressing her belief that the band is stagnating. Frustrated, yet understanding the importance of unity, Larry seeks advice from Cappy, who encourages him to compromise. Ultimately, they decide to evolve their sound, rebranding themselves as Hardest Times. Despite this change, tensions continue to simmer. The wedge that would ultimately drive them apart comes on August 23rd of that year. They had a big show, the biggest they'd played in quite some time, for an upscale club who had paid extra for them to play longer than their usual. Larry's world turns upside down when he unexpectedly walks in on his bandmates Styx and Marianne having sex in their RV. This shocking discovery reveals they'd been engaged in an affair since the launch of their band in the city. Moments before their encounter, Marianne had confided in Styx that she was pregnant with this child, igniting a whirlwind of emotions that led them to be intimate right there in the RV. Conflicted about her situation, Marianne isn't sure whether the baby is Styx or Larry's, but she hopes for the former. As Larry processes this betrayal, he feels bewildered that Marianne hadn't ended things with him before pursuing Styx. Overwhelmed by the sight and sound of their intimacy, Larry leaves the RV, abandoning both the band and his former life. He wanders the city streets with Cappy, seeking solace in music and companionship. They find a low-budget hotel called the Sasquatch to crash for the night. Although he has some cash left, it's not enough to sustain him in the long term, and he reflects on how the upcoming show was meant to be their big break. Now it was overshadowed by his departure. The thought of his former band potentially embarrassing themselves without him brings him a bittersweet sense of satisfaction, as he recalls how Hardest Times had always been centered around him. In a twist of fate, though, Larry is recognized in the hotel lobby by Aaron Lowey, a member of a local band called Caraway Hearts. Larry knows of them and has labeled them a drug band, notorious for losing their way due to substance abuse. They strike up a conversation, and Aaron offers Larry a position in Caraway Hearts, having just kicked out their own guitarist for said drug issues. The opportunity is a dream come true for Larry, but it comes with a heavy implication. Larry is haunted by a promise made to his sister Heather after their brother Stephen struggles with LSD. She encouraged him to pursue his passion for music, but asked him to stay clean, knowing the temptations of the road. Larry recalls her words, affirming that he wouldn't want to hurt his family, especially seeing how it affected Stephen. Larry, against the decision of Cappy, decides to join the band and follow his dream. Larry then wakes up in an unfamiliar hotel room some time after, disoriented, shocked by the chaotic state around him. As fragments of the previous night flood back, he recalls the colorful lights of the club where he performed. The celebration didn't end there. It spilled into the hotel room, transforming into an orgy involving people he barely knew. Amid the wildness, someone had introduced heroin, and he had shot up along with the others. His heart sinks as he examines his arms, seeing the marks left by the drug use. Overwhelmed in shame and fear, he realizes he's alone. His bandmates and the partygoers have left him, taking his belongings with them. In that moment, he remembers he had been conscious during their departure, but his body betrayed him, rendering him unable to move. A chilling thought strikes him. He was having a seizure. The physical stiffness he felt now was an all-encompassing ache. Despair washes over him as he contemplates dying in this room, but he feels something in his pocket. It's the cassette player with the headphones. Reluctantly, he puts them on, hearing the familiar voice of Cappy. Cappy's tone is accusatory, reminding Larry of the advice he ignored about staying away from the band and its influences. "I don't want to hear her right now, Cappy," Larry groans, feeling miserable, but Cappy presses on, stressing the seriousness of the situation. He informs Larry he only has $100 left and suggests he go visit his family, ominously hinting that something terrible has happened. Confused and alarmed, Larry presses for more information, but Cappy remains cryptic, eventually revealing, "They're gonna want you there for the wake." Panic sets in, and Larry processes this news, fearing the worst. He demands to know what has happened, but Cappy refuses to divulge any further details. After an hour of futile questioning, Larry reluctantly gets out of bed, still reeling from the revelation. He confirms the money in his pocket and knows it's all he has left. Stumbling out of the hotel, he makes his way to a nearby car and rental place and spends half of his remaining cash on the cheapest vehicle available. As he drives back home, his mind races with the thoughts of his brother Stephen. He knows Stephen's been partying more than their parents realize. He's filled with dread about the possibility of an overdose. Larry grapples with guilt, feeling hypocritical for judging drug use when he himself was under the influence of heroin. Desperate, he prays that Stephen's okay, hoping against hope he can still find his brother alive. Heather George, 27, has passed away this past weekend from serious injury sustained in a collision with another driver who was under the influence of alcohol and other narcotics. Heather was a cherished daughter to Gilbert and Teresa George. She was finishing her senior year at Yale University and working at the Hobbs & Carlton law firm. The news of her passing is a terrible tragedy for her family, who wishes for prayers in these tough times. Services shall be held on Sunday, September 9th at the Harmony Hill Funeral Home. Larry was unwelcome in his own home. He could feel it plain as day. Happiness was unwelcome in the George home on the day of the news of Heather's death. She was coming home to surprise her parents with a weekend of what was supposed to be good times. She was sideswiped by 30-something who was driving 40 over the speed limit on I-87. He had just lost his job by being drunk on the premises for the last time. He didn't know what to do about the mounting debt he had, so when he emerged onto the highway, absolutely nothing else mattered. Not even the girl who he slammed into. Larry only stayed so long to hear the news before he took off again. It took that long for the reality of the world to fully set in. Heather's death was real. She was gone from this world, and worst of all, he knew his father blamed him for being the surviving child. He wasn't sure what he felt about Stephen, but he was sure there was absolutely no love he would receive from Gilbert George. So, to avoid any conflict for his mother, he skipped out on planning for the wake and started driving in the rental car. He didn't know where he was going, just that it was anywhere but his home. There was no stereo in the car, but it had a cassette player. Larry shook his head and reached into his pocket. He knew the cassette player would be there, and it was. He ejected the tape and slid it into the car's cassette player. "What the fuck did you do?" Larry asked. "You chose not to listen to me.
I told you there would be consequences. I am not giving you advice for no reason, Larry. If you would have listened to me, this terrible tragedy would have never happened. So you're telling me 100% that you're the one who killed my sister? Is that fucking it? This whole time you've been trying to lead me down the right path, but you pull a stunt like that? Larry, you are missing the point. I did not kill Heather. If anyone can be blamed, aside from the drunk driver, it was you. You made the choice that led to her death. So you're blaming me then? Oh, that's just rich. Fuck this. We're done, Cappy. I'm done talking to you. I would not do that if I were you, Larry. We would not want any more accidents in the George family, now would we? Is that a threat? Larry couldn't believe it. All this time he'd kept Cappy close to him and never realized just how manipulative he could have really been. I am only trying to help you, Larry. If you break our pact, then I will have to be forced to get you to comply by any means necessary. Pact? I was 5 years old. I can't legally make any sort of pact or contract or anything like that at 5. Larry, do you assume I live by your rules? You live by the law. It's the fucking law. I do not care about the law. I care about you. I would recommend you not mention this to the police, however. I am more than sure you'll be detained for clinical insanity. Trust me when I say we both do not want that. Larry pulled to the side of the road and threw his head in his hands. What do you want me to do? Just listen to you forever? Is that so bad? Have I told you to do anything that breaks your laws? Have I told you to kill other people? No, Larry. I have been looking out for you from the very beginning. But you were difficult. You live with a rebellion in your heart. You believe it's in rebellion of those who keep you down. But that is not true. You keep yourself down, and you rebel against yourself. Just like when you joined up with that drug den of a band. All I want is to help set you right, to ease your pain. You ease my pain by killing my sister? I will tell you again, Larry. You killed your sister. Your rebellion against yourself pushed those balls into motion. If she were to remain living, then you would not learn your lesson. You would not grow. And that is what you must do now, and I will help you. My next piece of advice is going to require a big sacrifice on your part. But you have to believe that I know what is best for you. What is it? Larry asked, shaking his head. You were going to join the army. Larry signed up for boot camp that very same day. Next, we're going to move ahead to 1986 and meet back with some familiar faces back over in San Diego. In a time that can only be described as a horror movie made real, Alex finds herself outside in the harsh winter elements, overwhelmed by a mix of emotions and physical sensations. The cold rain and crunching snow amplify her despair as tears streak past her face, mingling with the blood. Dressed only in light petticoat and a skirt given to her by Noah, she feels woefully unprepared for the freezing weather. Consumed by regret and self-doubt, she berates herself for her previous actions that have led to her current situation, alone and vulnerable on New Year's Day. In a moment of anguish, she screams in frustration and drops to her knees, crying into the snow while cradling something tightly in her hands. The opulent Marshall Manor looms behind her, a stark contrast to her despair. In their heated exchange, Alex expresses her frustration with their situation, declaring everything feels wrong. She rejects Devin's plea to remain quiet and compliant, insisting that they don't truly belong in this chaotic environment. Her outburst signals her struggle for autonomy and truth in a life that feels increasingly suffocating. This moment encapsulates the emotional turmoil that drives her to the brink. Devin looks away from her. I'm done, he says quietly. What? She says, a hurt look crossing her face. I said I'm done. I'm done trying. I've tried this whole damn time to be your person. I've given up my whole life to grow with you. I helped you go when you were at your worst. Seems like that wasn't worth anything, huh? Alex looks at him with a hurt, confused look. I said go! Get the hell out of this house. I don't want you. I don't want you here anymore. Leave, like you said you never would. Devin, I've been afraid for my life for these past 5 years. You cannot play the guilt card on me, she says, her being replaced by newfound courage. Devin turns around, nearly stumbling over. Listen, go. Just get the hell out of here. I don't need you. Devin, go. Just go, he says, not turning. She turns and walks to the door, but a slight hesitation stops her. She turns around. So, this is it. You're really done? You're just gonna let everything end like this? No matter how much better you think you've gotten since you've come here, you'll always be Noah's bitch, stuffing you like his pig until you learn all of this is a scam. He's breathing heavy now, shaking even. He reaches up and grabs for the cord around his neck, yanking on it until it snaps. The crystal necklace dangles at his side, the shining blue alluringly calling for attention. Nothing but a cunt, he says before his face grows grotesque, and he lobs the necklace at her. She sits in the snow with a bloody nose, broken from the impact, crying her heart out as she clasps the necklace between her fingers, memories of the past flashing through her mind as she wonders where it all went wrong. She stands back to her feet, running farther into the cold winter morning, running and running without end, passing not a single soul. She had no journey, no goal, no life to return to. Her mother and father were both dead, no siblings to speak of, no goals in life to pursue. She was no longer a person. She hadn't been since she stepped foot in Noah Marshall's mansion. She just kept on running. She ran until her feet would allow her to run no longer. She collapsed on that side of the highway as she was slowing near the corner, falling finally into a ditch. She could cry no longer, run no longer, feel no longer. Her whole body ached, and she only wanted it to stop. Alex. She woke to her name being called, moments before death most likely. She knew she was going to die, and now she was hallucinating. There was nobody awake at this time in the morning, not even on the highway. The whole world had become silent to her pain. It is unfair. It was unfair? What had been it specifically? Life? Alex could testify to that. She slowly did what motion she could in her ditch, and she nodded. It is unfair. The voice in her mind was more reassuring this time. It was almost like a soft pillow she were resting on. Yes, she strained. It is unfair. You deserve justice. Justice? Alex asks. Yeah. She feels a warming sensation in her hands. She looks into the crystal, a smile forming on her face. Inside, the crystal looked like a man made out of metal. He offers her warmth, and she decides to take it. She feels her body glow with a magical warmth she'd been missing for a long time. It is a nice transition before her body grows cold for a final time. The crystal, a mysterious artifact kept close since he gave it to Devin when they were young children, would glow for a final time as a sort of light draws from Alex's body. Her skin grows white and she lies silent for good. A body enters the frame. A slender Noah Marshall walks on the side of the highway, getting closer and closer towards Alex. He strolls up right toward her body and bends down, picking up the necklace in his own hands. He pockets it and turns around. He walks back toward the mansion, beginning to whistle a tune with a spring in his step. Now, with those events behind us, we're going to be moving forward 4 years to 1990. 4 years have passed, and Larry is now stationed in Panama under the command of Richard Dick Haddad and First Lieutenant Robert Paz. They have been stationed out by the British Embassy for an act of self-defense against the Panamanian Defense Force. Their mission was codenamed Operation Just Cause. On his very first night out in Panama, Larry wasn't the only soldier that went to his solitary quarters clutching a cassette player. Dick Haddad also had one. It was strange, his cassettes were starting to get old when he was young, so to see them still used by anyone normally was very strange. Larry's mind drifted. He wondered if Dick also had his own guide to listen to, but wrote it off as preposterous. The man was easily twice his own age, so it made sense that he'd stick to what he was comfortable with. Suddenly, the quiet of the night was shattered by the sounds of gunfire, jolting Larry back to reality. It was his watch, and he instinctively began to shout for everyone to form up and prepare for action. The chaos escalated when a private, a fellow soldier accompanying them, is shot and falls to the ground, his life snuffed out in an instant. The sight of the young man's face hauntingly reminds Larry of Heather, making it difficult for him to focus on the immediate danger. Desperate to shake off the painful memories, he takes cover, heart racing. As the night unfolds, Larry and his team, led by Captain Bartholomew Barry Rainwater, work together to defend their camp and repel the attacking rebel forces. The atmosphere is tense, but they manage to regroup and discuss their reasons for being in Panama over a meal. A few days later, Larry and the rest of his squadron are relocated to the Fort Clayton military base, northwest of Balboa. Larry didn't get much of any chance to settle inside the base, as he was immediately invited by Barry, Dick, and Robert for a nice dinner at the nearby Marriott Hotel. Larry asked Cappy in private what he thought of the idea, but Cappy had stopped entertaining irrelevant questions by this point in their relationship. No answer meant Larry was free to decide on his own accord. He agreed, and so the four of them left out in a civilian vehicle. Four of them dressed in their finest and headed out. Trouble arose along the way when Panamanian civilians, alongside PDF members, ambushed their car, convinced they were armed and dangerous on a recon mission against the PDF. People surrounded the car and hammered on the sides of the windows, demanding they stop and surrender themselves. Larry felt a claustrophobic feeling as all the bodies were packed around the car. One of the PDF soldiers outside opened fire in the sky, which erupted the rest of the bullets to begin flying. One shot pierced the driver's side window and stuck Dick in the shoulder. Another shot, this time from behind, shatters the back windshield and sprays Robert's blood across the back passenger seat. Larry, horrified, leaps up in front and laid into the horn as Dick got control of himself enough to drive out of the panic. The crowd scurried away as they redirected to the Gorgas Army Hospital. Robert died the instant the bullet scattered his brain, but otherwise the group survived with their lives. We then move forward a year as we cross into 1991. Larry was honorably discharged after his time in Panama and returned to America at the start of the new year. He was homeless, but his time in the army provided him with the funds to get himself something small to crash in until he figured out what the next step in his life was. Cappy was silent on the days he returned to the States, so his time was largely spaceless, weightless. He felt like he was floating on nothingness with no way to move forward. Near the end of the month, a letter arrived in the mail from Dick asking for a meetup to discuss some personal matters. Larry didn't want to respond to the letter at first. Seeing Dick would only bring back terrible memories of Robert or every single dead body he'd seen while in Panama. Which would only go further to bring fresh memories of Heather back into his mind, but something inside him urged him to follow up on the meetup. The two went to an upstate New York diner, and the two friends greeted each other as they sat down and ordered a couple of coffees. "Why'd you write?" Larry started off the conversation. "I don't think you want to strike up friendly conversation just said like that." "Sharp as a tack, George," Dick said, and took an apprehensive sip of his coffee. "I haven't been sleeping lately, but not for the obvious reasons. I keep thinking back to that night we were all talking, all hours of the night, and you said you felt like you've had a guardian angel. I didn't think much of it then, but I've gone back to that conversation so many times in my mind now, and how you said it, how you believed it, it stuck with me. Made me think you weren't talking about a hypothetical figure." "What do you mean, hypothetical figure?" Dick looked like he was conflicted about sharing, but decided to in the end. "I've seen you eye my Walkman more than once. I thought at first you just klepto-eyes, but when I got to know you, I pushed that possibility out of my head. It still seems strange to me. I feel stupid for not realizing it now, but since coming back, I've been thinking, and I finally put two and two together. You hear the voice too, don't you?" Larry didn't respond, not at first. It felt like he was playing a tactical game of cards, and wasn't sure if he should reveal his hand. In the end, he did, and the two talked about their shared experiences. Dick, too, had been following the words of a voice, although he was never given a name. The voice assured him that he'd be able to help him in life. Larry shared that his experience was just as similar, and asked if he had his Walkman on him. Dick nodded, saying it's with him wherever he goes. Dick brought out the Walkman and handed it over to Larry. "Hold on, try the headphones. Tell me if the voice is the same." Larry did, sliding them over his ears, and his body felt hot as he slid his fingers over the play button. He pressed it and waited. He waited some more, and then the drum beat of the song kicked in, driving in the melody of the track. There wasn't any voice, just the song that was originally recorded on the tape. Larry excused himself from the table and left the diner, leaving a distraught Dick holding the Walkman and sitting alone with the two coffees. Larry was on the road faster than a jaguar in a jungle and slammed his own tape into his beat-up car's stereo. He turned on to I-87 and started driving north. "What do you really want, Cappy? You talking to Dick, too?" "Larry, I talk to many people." "You never said that. Not once." He slammed his fist on the steering wheel. "Why would I need to tell you that? I'm done, Cappy. I quit. I did everything you asked me to. I signed up for the army. I'm done. You are far from done. You do not want your father's cancer to become terminal. Cancer? Terrible thing, really. He was diagnosed on Christmas Eve of all times. Poor man is too proud to tell you, because it's a sign of weakness. You're lying. I have never lied to you, Larry. You lied to me about talking to other people. No, I did not. I did not think it was important that you know, so I did not tell you. I never lied about it, though. It's basically the same thing. It isn't, but wouldn't you rather worry about your father than argue pedantics? Larry didn't have a response for Cappy. I am growing tired of your attitude, Larry. If I'm going to continue being your guide, I need to know that you will listen to me when I give you advice. Larry gripped the wheel tighter and gritted his teeth. What do you mean? I need to see if you can follow directions. Larry, stop the car. What? Stop the car, Larry. I can't. We're on the highway. Larry groaned and pulled the car into the rightmost lane and slowed off to the emergency stop lane. What? What do you want me to do? We're going to exit your vehicle. We'll walk into the woods and strangle what you find. Whoa, what? Larry sat straight up like a lightning rod. What the fuck, Cappy? Time is ticking, Larry. You have 5 minutes to prove to me you're in this. The radio turned off. Larry heaved a sigh and rested his head on the steering wheel. He thought he was alone in the car, until he finally convinced himself to unbuckle and barrel out onto the highway, hurling himself over the railing and stumbling into the woods. He cursed and looked around in a panic as the mental timer continued to tick down. He finally saw what Cappy had in mind. He had no clue how Cappy knew he'd be there, but here it was. It was a stray dog, scrappier than most he'd seen. It looked about how he felt. Its back leg was bent at an odd angle. Looks like it was broken. The dog must have been here suffering for a long time because it no longer cried out. It only looked at Larry and thumped its tail weakly. In that moment, time seemed to stop and a world of indecision flowed inside him, like a whirlwind. Next, we're going to travel forward 7 years and return back to San Diego. 1997. Sirens. He thinks he's just heard an ambulance, such a familiar noise. He wanted it to come just a tiny bit closer. Devin is much older now, looking like he's in his mid-20s. Devin Captain, it'll read on the autopsy. His won't be the only one filed, not even close. Bonnie and Noah Marshall, Dante Ramsey, Craig Portsmouth, Sherry Chimes, plus several others whom he never met. He remembers. March 18th, 1997. It was a nice and breezy morning. He woke up feeling particularly energized. Alex was long gone. Their falling out was almost 10 years ago now, not long after his last memory of the mansion. Devin tried to reason with her, but she just wouldn't listen. He remembers getting angry. Really angry. He tried calling her every day. Nobody ever answered. He couldn't leave the mansion to look for her because he loved him. She left. He loved her. It was an impossible choice then to leave or to stay. He was sickened by that knowledge, knowing how stupid everything sounds, and yet he still made it. How could it have gotten so messed up? Time begins to rewind, the drool on his lips begin to resalivate and slowly climb back up into his mouth, and the life returns to his eyes. All goes backwards until the phone comes out, and everything resumes when you press the dial button. The phone begins ringing. He was alone in his bedroom in the lofty mansion, long upgraded from the shared room of years past. He was sweating profusely and pacing around with a large phone craned in the small of his neck, pressed up against his ear. At the beep, please leave your name. The automated voice froze out. Fuck! Alex, you stupid cunt, answer your goddamn phone! He calls out, breathing hard. I'm sorry. Look, I'm sorry for what I just said, but you need to answer. I know it's been a long time since we talked, but you need to pick up your goddamn phone. There's a silence as he reached his desk at the end of the room. Lying on top are 3 pills of varying shapes and sizes. He said, if you won't pick up, which I know you will eventually, I'm gonna start getting mad. I really fucking hate it when you ignore me. Gosh, I'm so sick of you when you do this, you know? No, know, he said to himself, putting the phone away from his ear. I'm sorry, Alex. I'm so fucked up. I'm in too deep. I don't know what to do. Is that what you want me to say? Do you want me to beg? I beg you to pick up your goddamn phone, because I need to talk to you. If you don't, then all of this will be your fault. The bell rings off in the distance. Once, twice, 3 times. He looks off through his window to the balcony in the center of the courtyard. Bonnie's figure is silhouetted by the moonlight behind her as she rings the bell. This was the signal that Noah had prepared for, the beginning of their ritual. Once the bell had rung 3 times, each of them would, from their own quarters, ingest the 3 separate pills and supposedly move on to the next life. This is all your fault, you fucking cunt. I did everything for you, and you threw it all away like it was nothing. After all this, I kept your present to me. You know the one. Consider this the end. I'm through. Fuck you. With that, he tosses the phone at the wall, smashes against it and falls to the floor in 2 pieces, and then picks up each pill and ingests. Now, we're gonna move to 1999. Friedrich Adada is sentenced to death for his crimes at the Schroeder experiment in early January of 1999, and it is with his death that he returns to the dimension between dimensions to act as its overseer. And it's also at this point that the timeline splits. We will be focusing on the timeline I've entitled Apocalypse for the rest of this video, as is featured in the later chapters of Telos. But during this next explanation, I do want to slot in details from 2 novellas that I've never released that feature extra details during this time period. So when we get to them chronologically, I will fit them in and add the small details that I have to give you a little more context into this world. In 1999, Gavin Daniels is born in Athens, Ohio, on March 1st in 1999, to Gregory and Lorraine Daniels. In Aurora, Colorado, Andrew Cress is born on July 4th, 2003, to David and Elena Cress. Both children's parents work as freelance scientists for NASA. They are part of an elite and unique research sect that experiments on foreign materials discovered on missions throughout space and the otherwise unknown. There had always been rumors spreading of NASA finding life-changing materials on a more recent trip to the moon, the trip that had begun the installation of the Sustaining series of lunar bases set up for life and research up on the moon. These reports were misleading in truth, but they caught the attention of the Freeman's Word, a group of freelance journalists whose mission it was to combat corporation scandal and investigate private information holds as it spreads to among the public, a new age of yellow journalism. Brian Jackson, founder of the Freeman's Word, tasked Jean Armando, an associate of his, to research NASA and the evidence of the unit's creation to study extraterrestrial material. Jean begins her work undercover, applying as a bookkeeper to the organization's unit in Denver. It turns out they'd previously been holding office space under the name of the American Lung Association as to keep attention away from the work they've been doing. If anybody had any serious inquiries about the ALA, then the head manager would direct them to inquire about their Eastern Bridge over in New York. They would then repeat the process and redirect them back to the Western Bridge, and keep it going ad infinitum until the inquirer lost interest. Jean Armando was not one such inquirer to lose interest so easily, so after the initial redirect of the in-time secretary, Jean posted upon herself to remote hack into one of the building servers using a custom-rig computer to break into one of their secure networks. Inside, she discovers a plethora of encrypted information, much that looks to be way too complicated to belong to the servers of the American Lung Association. Jean's new discovery doesn't last long as the building shuts down in defense from the cyber attack. Her hack is countered as it locks her computer up, and subsequently begins displaying her location from the counter hack, unknown to Jean. She begins driving away from the building. She is sure that there are massive secrets being held by those that work in the Republic Plaza. She doesn't know why else they would need that level of security. As she continues to drive back to Colorado to San Francisco, she doesn't realize she's actually being tailed by hired guns from those that worked in the Republic Plaza. It turns out that those working there were an origin project of the idea of testing new chemical weapons in the depths of space, weapons that would be kept by the United States government as a trump card, should they ever want to formally give up their title as a democracy. It also turns out that the workers inside the building had been communicating with several war veterans who knew the high and low of weapon severity, and had used their information in accordance to their designs. These two are Gunther Ward and Leonard Stone. Once their security alarm sounds, they realize they are being attacked through one of their networks. They hop onto the action double time and shut out the attack. Confused as to how someone had broken through their signal, they trace the origins of the attack to a computer signal, most likely not natural. They run a counter-trace and begin searching out the one that had attempted the hack. Not wanting to risk the information of their work being leaked out and causing World War III, they send the veterans well armed to take care of the possible threat. And they're happy to oblige. Ward and Stone track Jean all the way back to San Francisco. It is here that they realize where Jean works. Ward signals his info in and receives a call back saying to torch the place. They do as they are instructed. Fire is set to the Freeman's word, and it spreads quickly, unknown to the workers inside until it's too late. All but Brian Jackson perish in the fire. Brian manages to make it out alive with fragments of the data he had pulled from Jean's computer. He realizes he's potentially in more danger than he could have ever believed, and begins packing up his things. This causes conflict at home, as Brian forces himself to keep quiet about the fire. He doesn't want them to know the danger he could be in, and thus involve his family. He leaves without another word, keeping himself together as his wife screams at him from the inside. He knows that she'll take good care of their kids, while he goes on what could very well be a suicide mission, to spread the truth. Brian hops towns and frequents several smaller cities and towns surrounding San Francisco, posting bits and pieces of the data he found online anonymously, as to not give his location. He realizes it must be important, and someone must be on the lookout, because not long after he posts the information and specs on the chemical bomb, it'll be taken or hidden from public view. He changes up his angle, and begins working his way over to 4chan, posting there, then moving on to Reddit, and then finally spreading it out over various popular internet boards. The news finally begins to gain traction. It begins receiving sub-mainstream coverage. Of course, the news has its share of doubters and naysayers, and it quickly becomes one of the most quickly debated topics on the underside of the internet. Turns out back at the Republic Plaza, the workers who had been testing the chemical weapons have long since deserted their workstations. Both Leonard Stone and Gunther Ward are nowhere to be found, after a piece of cloth with their DNA is found at the scene of the Freeman's Ward building. The building is listed as in renovations, but no real changes are made to the layout of the interior. Instead, NASA buys out the building in the middle of August 2006 and designs a unit to research materials from space, but eventually ends up becoming the research lab for the Prometheans. Now I'm going to quickly talk about the first of the unreleased novellas. This is called The Promethean Tale. This story was going to dive deeper into the bonds between David Cress, Gregory Daniels, and Jay Ryan. These are all of the parents of the main characters of the first 3 Radical-9 Saga books, as they have known each other in their past. But we don't specifically ever learn about that past. This was going to be told through the first-person perspective through Jay Ryan. It includes important events from their lives, such as Jay meeting Karen Sanderson, his will-be wife, and it was also going to showcase the events that split up the 3 friends for 5 years, until they all eventually find a way to become part of the Radical-9 incident as freelance scientists under President Hal Valhart. And next we're going to make a detour to the second unreleased novella. This one's called The Burned Girl. This story takes place in Denver, Colorado in the year 2005. It is the backstory behind a previous inhabitants of the Republic Plaza, as we just described with Gunther Ward and Leonard Stone, who were under orders from Hal Valhart, and also of the girl who was burned alive and found by both the Prometheans and Gavin years later. The year is either 2005 going into 2006, and it was told from the perspective of a 16-year-old daughter of billionaire lawyer Oscar Gray, named Madeline. The story begins with news reports of tragic deaths. Maddie's Gray's death is what causes the Freeman's Word to become interested in the activities of those in the Republic Plaza before the Prometheans. Madeline Gray is rich and a popular teenager. She hasn't ever had to worry about much in the way of school or money. Everything's been worked out for her. Her father's a lawyer and her mother's a banker, and she's also got a lot of friends. She's very friendly towards everyone she meets, not wanting her wealth to determine how others see her. She has a crush on a boy in her class, Seth Stone. Seth never gave her the time of day. He always seemed hip to hip with Maddie's best friend Jordan. Everything seemed to follow a sort of routine until out of the blue one day, Seth and Jordan get into a big fight. Seth accuses Jordan of cheating on him, and the two break up. The next morning, Seth begins to put the moves on Maddie, causing a rift in their friendship with Jordan. As Maddie goes along with it, the two go back and forth until Seth says she can meet up with him by the park in the main plaza later that night, not really asking. She nervously accepts the not invitation and can't stop thinking about it for the rest of the day. She gets a ride from her father, who chides her the whole way down to not go too fast with the boy. They both know what happens. Maddie doesn't date much because she gets attached too quickly. It really does become a problem, but she knows the only way she can get over it is by working through it, and that requires practice. It's near 8 o'clock, and Maddie has trouble finding Seth. She begins to get worried as she scolds herself for not getting his number. Out of the darkness, Seth appears and scares her, laughing. She tells him it's not funny, and he replies that it's hilarious. This is when he punches her stone cold in the face and falls to the ground. She thinks her nose is broken. Seth steps over her and says that was way too easy. Maddie tries to ask what is happening, but then she feels a sharp pain in her abdomen as a loud shot rings out. Seth's holding a gun. She sees a blood pooling around her and passes out. She awakens in a dark room. Voices in her head all scream out, but one in the real world keeps him there. Seth. Maddie asks him what's going on, and he says it's what needs to be done. Her parents are gonna need to pay a lot of money to get her back, and depending on how long it takes will determine her condition. Seth bends down to her level, saying if things go smoothly, she'll be back home by the end of the day. She can accompany him to class on Monday. Maddie spits in his face, and his anger overcomes him. He smacks her across the face. Just then, Seth is shot in the shoulder, and he falls to a knee, screaming out. An older man comes out, magnum in hand. He tells Seth that no unnecessary harm must come to her, undeserved. They still need her as leverage. Seth nods and whimpers off, and now the man fully comes into the picture. He is Seth's father and a veteran of war, but turned hitman by a third party. He then takes out Maddie's phone, which he had taken from her when she was knocked out, and searches through it in front of her, finding the contact named Dad. He calls it once and then picks up almost immediately. Maddie screams out, and the man tells Maddie's father the terms of the ransom, $5 million. Now, this is as far as I got in the development of this story. Obviously, it never got written, and you can tell that Seth is the son of Leonard Stone. There was going to be much more fleshed out in sense of getting Gunter Ward, the rest of fleshing that out. But I'm sure with the end result, with her being burned alive, you can fill in some of the blanks from here. Now, let's return back to the story of the Prometheans and released stories. 2008. Gregory and Lorraine Daniels were split up due to the nature of their work. Lorraine was hired on as a project director on the Eastern Branch, located in the newly renovated Empire State Building in New York City, so that more work could be accomplished. This led to Gregory taking Gavin to Denver to live in an apartment while he worked with the Western Branch of scientists hired by NASA in 2007. Gregory is then handed the task of joining up with Jack Adata to research 2 new elements called lantrate and dicoberine 1 year later, promising a hefty paycheck in return. Gregory accepts. He wishes to have the money to give his son a good life, not realizing how dangerous these elements truly become. Jack had obtained the 2 elements from his father and rediscovers more of the elements on Mars when he orders his space crew to investigate in 2008. During an experiment, Jack accidentally burns Gregory's arm with sulfuric acid due to a mistake caused by his prosopagnosia. Gregory, alongside other scientists, Jay Ryan, Mason Radica, and David Cress, and Jack all begin to work to research the new elements under the name of the Prometheans. Gregory was promised a pay raise alongside the potential to do good for humanity to join up with the project, much like the others. The fact that they are assigned to the task of their jobs for almost all hours of the day, most of the Republic Plaza is renovated, so that the scientists can live within the lab for continuous work on the project. This includes their children. Mason's 16-year-old daughter, Kate Radica, is the one put in charge of looking and taking care of the other children while their parents are hard at work. This includes Gavin Daniels, Megan Adata, Andrew Cress, and Jennifer Adata. During the testing, it is discovered that both the lantrate and dicoberine cause a chemical reaction when combined with calcium and radium. Jack presses on with the testing after the qualms brought on by Jay, and it ends in catastrophe. There is an explosion that blows them all down. It isn't explosive enough to kill any of the 5 scientists in the room, but it does end up leaving anti-energy as a byproduct, except it is given another name in this timeline, Radical-9, after the names of the elements used to create it: radium, dicoberine, calcium, lantrate. The Radical-9 spreads through the air in a gaseous state. The 5 scientists become victims of Radical-9 poisoning. Jack experiences the largest amount of side effects considering his lineage and of being composed of anti-energy himself, and him being closest to the chemicals as they react. Radical-9 also spreads to the lower floors of the Republic Plaza. All of the scientists inside the Republic Plaza are poisoned by the Radical-9. In this timeline, Jack and the 4 other scientists are unable to contain the Radical-9 inside of the Republic Plaza. It slowly begins to leak out into the city of Denver. But it isn't until the Radical-9 in Jack's body begins to overwhelm him does it begin to do damage. Jack's human side does not mesh with the overload of Radical-9 in his system, so it causes an explosive reaction, destroying the Republic Plaza and the entire city of Denver. It is Jack's explosion that causes the Radical-9 outbreak within this timeline. The Radical-9 spreads out through the West Coast and into the Midlands, and on March 18, 2029, there are more explosions that go off in the Midlands of the United States, further spreading the poison further east. The East Coast is wholly poisoned by Radical-9 by 2030, and the people begin panicking, hiding themselves in bomb shelters as they begin to learn that it's the people that are infected with Radical-9 poisoning that explode once their bodies have had enough. Humanity realizes their impending doom on Earth, so they ship off Radical-9 survivors up to the Sustinium series of lunar installations that have been in development. They have limited time and fuel, so they can only reach the 10th base. On the rocket up is Gavin Daniels, Andrew Cress, Grace Jackson, Thomas Hadley, and Kate Radica. All but Gavin are being preserved in cryogenic stasis, as they each have a bit of Radical-9 poisoning within their systems. Gavin was chosen to oversee them as he was gauged to have the least amount in his system at the time of the decision. In 2042, there is an explosion which causes a chain reaction all throughout New York, Massachusetts, and several other East Coast states, which rips through America like wildfire. They arrive all the bombs dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, multiplied by 10. The chain reaction rips the entire planet in two, and what are left rip it to tiny and tinier pieces in the coming years. For the next 18 years, Gavin tends the 4 bodies in cryostasis aboard the Sustinium 10 base. He has enough food and water to sustain an entire colony, so he doesn't need to worry about keeping himself alive. Luckily, the Radical-9 does not cause his body to explode, as it's gotten used to coexisting within the corruption in his system. Gavin wakes up every day to adjust the power cycles for the cryopods, to keep those inside at a consistent pressure within the machine. He uses magnetism to supercool the body and preserve essential brain function, but as each of the contained is different in both mass and composition, they need to be manually adjusted daily. This puts Gavin into a schedule of constantly tending to the preservation of those inside the pods. Gavin sees the Earth explode in 2042 from outside his bedroom window. The sight is unlike any he'd ever seen. The place he'd call home was utterly obliterated in front of his eyes. In the 2 years he'd been up there, he'd been fearful, but there was a tinge of hope in his system that there'd be another rocket up someday to wake up everyone and tell him he could go home. Now that Earth was destroyed, he had absolutely no chance of that happening. He and the 4 in the pods were the last humans surviving. This is where his demeanor begins to shift. He loses his grip on insanity, and continuously doubts whether he should let the others out of their pods or not. On one hand, he wouldn't have to be so terribly alone, and maybe they could have been in the process of procreating. On the other hand, what if their Radical-9 levels are too unstable? What if letting them out causes their bodies to blow up and kill them all? These are the questions that endlessly run through Gavin's mind for the next 18 years. It's what causes his hesitation. In 2060, Gavin is approached by Jack Adata, seemingly from out of nowhere, just after he finishes daily calibration of the cryopods. Turns out this is a Jack Adata from another timeline entirely. He's actually come to offer a proposition to Gavin. He tells him the existence of the multiverse, and the possibility of him being able to go home. A different, but similar home. Gavin reacts just how Jack wants him to. It's clear Gavin of this universe has lost his mind, but Jack knows exactly which buttons to press to convince him to work alongside him. Jack tells Gavin of the horrible nature of humankind, how he shouldn't bother keeping up with those survivors alive. It wasn't like humankind left him in any better state. Gavin's thoughts become more vicious, and he entertains the thought of growing stronger, ditching behind the identity of Gavin Daniels and instead taking up the moniker as Micah. Micah asks Jack of his plan, and he says, like his counterpart in this universe, he'd been overloaded with Radical-9. He'd managed to avoid the fate in this timeline by stroke of luck that turned to be the way of how the Radical-9 had spread. He absorbed much less into his body than the version from this timeline, and didn't immediately explode. His problem, though, is he was still hit with a large chunk of it, so his body is actually decaying at an alarming rate. The plan is to set up a suitable host for him to take over, as his poisoning had enhanced his mind several times over, more than a normal human's, and he has the ability to hijack the brainwaves of another and insert his mind alongside it, taking control. Micah asks why he needs his help if he can just take over someone's mind. Jack says he loses all connections with his old body when he does it, so he only has a single chance. He'd be giving up his body and all the effects of the Radical-9 with it, both the good and the bad. So he needs to get into one that has approximately the same power, if not greater, with not as many drawbacks. He needs Micah's help in staging an event called the Natos game. It is going to bring the Gavin Daniels from his timeline into play, and Jack is going to try to hijack his mind. Specifically him, because he has already had some Radical-9 in his system, but not enough to be catastrophic in Jack's case, as that's why Micah is not in the cryopods with the other survivors. So, if Jack takes over, he'll have full control over Gavin's body and his subsequent abilities. Jack also explains that the Natos game is going to be a simulated death game, something created to bring out Gavin's full powers so that once Jack takes over, he'll be at full capacity. He explains this is necessary because the human body's inner fight-or-flight mechanism is in conjunction with Radical-9, reorganizes the body system around like a theoretical slot machine. They can trigger that response over a long period of time that can get the desired traits to rise out of Gavin like a spiritual sort of energy. Jack describes the leftover automaton research that Mason Radica had left unfinished in his timeline, and now he plans on utilizing the research to create an army of automatons. He leaves the actual development up to Micah, while Jack sets up the first Natos game, but he waits until the first automaton is completed, the one made in the vein of Jack's first daughter, Megan Adada. Once the Megan Adada automaton is completed, Jack travels back with it to his timeline, leaving Mika to resume work on the constructing of the automatons just as Jack had shown him. This causes the cryopods to be ignored, and due to mismanagement, all 4 survivors die, as the supercooling goes too far and stops their hearts completely. It isn't until a few months later that Jack returns with news to bring about an automaton, and quick. Gavin's consciousness has left his body and began interdimensional travel. By Jack himself going before, he carved a path that Gavin's consciousness will take to this timeline. Out of the numbers of automatons that Micah had created, he'd assembled a few in his own image, one even of him when he was younger, mainly out of his remembrance. Brings it out, and the dimensional tear opens as his consciousness comes through, still whole and held together with the Radical-9 mixed in as pure anti-energy. It is bonded with his existence. Gavin wakes up in control of the automaton created in his likeness. Unbeknownst to him at the time, he wakes up with other automatons in a docking bay of the Sestenio 10 base. The other automatons he wakes up with are the ones in likenesses of Thomas Hadley, Grace Jackson, Jean Armando, Andrew Cress, and Kate Radica. It is here that the events of the Natos Game 2 unfold after the reported failure of the original Natos game. The game concludes with Gavin learning the identity of the one who had gathered him, Micah, and learning that his mind has been transplanted in that of an automaton, and his original body has actually gone nuclear back in the other timeline, making ruins out of Dever once again. Michael tells him that he is the consciousness 41 years in the future, which isn't totally false. Micah plays on Gavin's insecurities and pleads for him to help save their world, his world. To do so, he needs to continue to develop his ability to jump into other universes. This ability is called jumping, but it is more accurately projecting your consciousness throughout the multiverse. Micah shows Gavin a project he had waiting in the wings. He calls it ICARUS, which stands for the Infinity Core Amplifier of Research Under the Sun, a collective stream of consciousness containing a database of memories of the survivors. Micah tells Gavin it had been built in case of an emergency with the 4 in the cryopods. The truth is, he'd actually constructed memories along with several automatons to program artificial consciousness within them to reflect those they were created after. Gavin begins to explore each of the survivors' memories as he begins to learn more about the circumstances surrounding his own powers. Seeing that he is developing, Jack intervenes in the situation and confronts Gavin personally, and reveals Micah's betrayal to Gavin's surprise. Jack tells him that he must continue with looking back into the past. Gavin believes it so he can learn the full story. Jack threatens to kill the survivors if he doesn't cooperate, and so Gavin agrees. Unfortunately, though, these survivors have all long since been dead. Gavin's powers fully develop, and he discovers his ability to explore the depths of the multiverse throughout the dimension between dimensions. Through this ability, he sees Micah conversing with Jack, and Jack revealing his plan of what he intends to do with Gavin once he comes back to the Sestenio base, which is, of course, to hijack his mind and take control of his body. Jack gives Micah a mission to search out a child he only calls the Dreamer. Gavin witnesses Jack's ability to create anti-energy from his body, which he's been self-generating. He fuses the anti-energy into Micah's body to raise the power of his augmentations to unforeseen levels. His DNA begins to change, and he begins to grow more feral. He grows a couple feet taller and broader, hair growing all over his body and becoming more wolf-like in appearance. He becomes the first ever Leffia, a feral creature that is created when humans become overexposed to anti-energy. This term will not go on to be used in any of the released novels, but is instead a concept that will be talked about as we bring up information from my unreleased novel, Habit Unto Instinct. Micah opens a dimensional rift and travels through it to the new timeline in search of John Rhine, the dreamer himself. Gavin realizes he has to do something, and he has to save the 4 survivors and get them out of Jack's hands. He returns to the Sustinial base and confronts Jack. He's severely outmatched as Jack begins to suffocate him using telekinesis, throws him against the wall, and then shows Gavin that the 4 survivors aren't actually survivors, and have actually been dead this whole time. He demonstrates on the cryopod that contains Andrew Cress, crushing the metal until his blood spills through the spheres. Gavin freaks out and lashes toward Jack, his emotions surging his abilities. It carries them both into the new timeline. Humanity is completely wiped out in the Apocalypse timeline at this point. Earth is destroyed. All other existence ceases to have meaning, as humans aren't there to observe it. The universe ends. And that's where we're going to leave it for now. The next time we'll be heading back to 1999 to observe the timeline our ferocious Jack-O-Data really begins to prosper and grow into the villain that we see him here as. We'll be tackling the front stories of the 3 novels that begin the saga, Radical-9, Telos, and Dreamer, and we'll be right in line to follow up with the stories in the time after that of the George family and Cappy, as well as Devin Campton and Alex Sharp. If you like this, you can check out my novels for free over on my Royal Road page, linked in the description. I have also downloadable ebook copies for sale over on my Ko-fi, and finally paperback and hardcover physical books over on Amazon. With that, check you guys next time.